The night air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and wilting jasmine, a veil of mist curling through the ancient oaks like the breath of forgotten gods. Elara's fingers trembled as she lifted the chipped porcelain cup to her lips, the steam rising in lazy spirals that blurred the stars above. Moonless tea, they called it, brewed from roots that clawed deep into shadow-veined soil, a potion whispered among the outcasts to bind the beast within. It tasted of iron and regret, coating her tongue like the first drop of blood from a fresh wound. She swallowed, feeling the warmth seep into her veins, a fragile dam against the wild tide that surged beneath her skin. The forest around her was a labyrinth of secrets, branches twisting like the spines of long-dead lovers, their leaves rustling in a wind that carried the distant howl of wolves. Not true wolves, but something more, echoes of the pack that had cast her out seasons ago when her shifts came unbidden and her eyes glowed with the fire of the untamed. Elara leaned against the rough bark of a tree, its texture biting into her palms, grounding her as the tea worked its numbing spell. She was no longer the girl who had danced under full moons in the village square, her laughter mingling with the fiddle's mournful strains. Now she was a shadow, fleeing the Alpha King's decree that echoed through the realms. All latent shifters must yield to the call or be hunted like prey. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the chill seeping through her threadbare cloak, raising gooseflesh along her arms. In the distance, the glow of torchlight flickered through the trees, hunters perhaps, or worse, the enforcers of the king's court. Elara's heart pounded, a drumbeat of fear and defiance. She had seen what the shift did to others, bodies contorting in agony, bones cracking like thunder, fur sprouting in waves of midnight black. For her, it was different. A pull that whispered of power she dared not claim, a curse inherited from a mother lost to the wilds. The tea was her only tether, bought from a crone in the borderlands with the last of her silver, promising nights of fragile humanity. As the mist thickened, swallowing the world in its grey embrace, Elara closed her eyes, willing the potion to hold. Memories flooded her unbidden. The warmth of her brother's hand in hers as children, racing through these same woods, pretending the shadows were allies rather than devourers. He had shifted first, embracing the wolf with a grin that lit the night, only to vanish into the pack's ranks, leaving her alone with the fear that gnawed at her soul. "It's a gift, Elara," he had said once, his voice rough with the change's edge. "The moon calls us home." But home had become a cage, the Alpha's throne a jagged crown forged from the bones of the resistant. A twig snapped nearby, sharp as a blade's edge. Elara's eyes flew open, her body coiling like a spring. The tea's haze dulled her senses, but not enough to miss the silhouette emerging from the fog, a figure tall and unyielding, cloaked in leather, etched with the runes of the royal hunt. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning the forest's whispers. She pressed deeper into the tree's shadow, the bark scraping her back, drawing a thin line of blood that mingled with the night's dew. The man, no, the enforcer, moved with predatory grace, his boots silent on the leaf-strewn ground. Moonlight, faint and silvery through the canopy's tiers, caught the glint of a silver medallion at his throat, the king's mark, a snarling wolf's head. Elara's breath hitched, the tea's bitterness rising in her throat like bile. She had heard tales of them, the Alpha's shadows, sent to drag the hidden ones before the throne, where the king's will twisted flesh and fate alike. Rumors spoke of a ritual under the blood moon, where shifters were forced to yield their essence, binding them eternally to the pack's iron rule. He paused, nostrils flaring as if scenting the air. Elara's fingers dug into the earth, nails breaking against roots that pulsed like veins. The tea held, but barely. She felt the stirrings deep in her core, a heat that clawed upward, threatening to shatter her fragile peace. Why now? Why here, in this forsaken glade, where the ancient stones stood sentinel, their carvings worn by centuries of wind and wolf song? The enforcer turned his head, eyes piercing the gloom. Golden, she realized with a chill, the mark of one who had fully embraced the shift, not just any wolf, but kin to the Alpha himself. Elara's mind raced, fragments of village lore surfacing. The king, Thorn Blackwood, whose roar could split mountains, whose gaze turned rivals to ash. He sought perfection in his pack, purging the weak, the reluctant. And she was the anomaly, the she-wolf who resisted. Her bloodline whispered to carry the old magic, the kind that could unmake thrones. He stepped closer, the air growing thick with the musk of pine and power. Elara's hand slipped to the dagger at her belt, its hilt worn smooth from nights of desperate grip. But steel meant nothing against the supernatural. It was her will that faltered, the tease hold fraying like mist in dawn's light. A low growl rumbled from his chest, vibrating through the ground, calling to the beast she buried. Her vision blurred, colors sharpening unnaturally. The green of leaves like emeralds, the black of shadows alive with movement. In that moment, as his eyes locked onto hers, Elara felt the first crack. A surge of heat blooming in her chest, fur prickling beneath her skin like 1,000 needles. The moonless tea betrayed her, its numbness giving way to the inevitable pull. She staggered, a gasp escaping her lips, the cup tumbling from her grasp to shatter against a stone. Shards glittered like fallen stars, and with them her illusion of control. The enforcer's lips curved in a wolfish smile, revealing fangs that gleamed white. "The king has waited long for you, little shadow," he murmured, voice like gravel over silk. "The shift comes, whether you drink or drown." Elara's world tilted, the forest spinning in a vortex of scent and sound, the howl of wind mirroring the one building in her throat. Pain lanced through her limbs, bones aching with the promise of change. She was no longer hidden. The hunt had found her, and in its jaws the truth of her blood awaited, fierce and unforgiving. As the first tremor shook her frame, she wondered if the Alpha's force would break her or forge her anew. The enforcer's words hung in the air like a noose, tightening around Elara's throat as the first wave of the shift crashed through her. Her knees buckled, the damp earth rising to meet her in a rush of mud and fallen leaves that clung to her skin like desperate fingers. Pain bloomed in her joints, a fire that licked along her bones, urging them to elongate, to reshape into something primal and unforgiving. She clawed at the ground, nails splintering against the unyielding soil, the scent of crushed ferns sharp and green in her nostrils. The forest, once a sanctuary of whispers, now roared in her ears, every rustle a threat, every shadow a predator's breath. He loomed closer, his golden eyes unblinking, reflecting the faint starlight like twin moons trapped in amber. Up close, the runes on his leather cloak gleamed with an inner phosphorescence, etched symbols that pulsed in time with her racing heart. They were wards. She knew from the old tales spun by firelight in hidden hollows, bindings to keep the wolf leashed or unleashed at the Alpha's command. His scent enveloped her, musk and iron, laced with the wild tang of pine sap and something darker, like blood spilled under a harvest moon. It stirred the beast within her, a low rumble echoing in her chest that she swallowed back with a choke. "Run if you must," he said, his voice a velvet growl that vibrated through the mist. "But the call is in your blood. The king feels it, even now, across the miles." He extended a hand, gloved in supple hide that creaked softly, not in threat but in invitation, a gesture that mocked her fraying resolve. Elara's vision swam, colors bleeding into one another, the enforcer's cloak a swirl of midnight and silver, the trees arching overhead like the ribs of some colossal decaying beast. She could taste the shift on her tongue, metallic and hot, As her gums ached where fangs threatened to pierce, memories surged unbidden, fragments of a life she had buried deep. Her mother's face, pale and drawn in the candle-lit hut, whispering of the old blood that coursed through their veins, not the pack's crude ferocity, but a deeper magic woven from the earth's forgotten veins. "It will save you or consume you," her mother had murmured before the fever took her, eyes glazing over as the wilds claimed what the village could not. Elara had fled then, leaving behind the thatched roofs and the judgmental stares, seeking solitude in the borderlands where the mist blurred the line between human and haunt. But solitude was a lie. The shift hunted her like a shadow cast by her own light. She staggered to her feet, the dagger forgotten at her belt, her body a battlefield of trembling limbs. The tea's remnants soured in her stomach, a futile rebellion against the tide. Fur prickled along her arms, soft at first, like down from a raven's wing, then coarser, spreading in patches that itched and burned. A snarl escaped her lips, half human, half beast, echoing off the ancient stones that ringed the glade. They were relics of the first pack, weathered monoliths carved with wolves mid-leap, their eyes hollow sockets that seemed to watch her unraveling. The enforcer circled her slowly, boots sinking into the moss with deliberate care, his presence a gravitational pull that warred with her instinct to flee. "Thorn Blackwood does not hunt for sport," he continued, his tone laced with a reverence that bordered on fervor. "He builds an empire from the broken. You carry the mark of the ancients, the she-wolf who could mend the fractures in our kind. Resist, and you doom us all." His words pierced deeper than any blade, stirring a flicker of doubt in her core. Was this destiny, this inexorable pull, or merely the king's chains disguised as fate? Elara lunged, not toward him but away, her legs propelling her into the underbrush with a burst of desperate speed. Branches whipped her face, drawing thin lines of blood that welled warm and coppery. The forest blurred into a frenzy of motion, leaves slapping her cheeks, roots snagging her ankles like grasping hands. Behind her his laughter followed, low and resonant, mingling with the pounding of paws that she swore she could hear, though he had not yet shifted. The shift clawed at her heels, her spine arching involuntarily, a yelp tearing from her throat as vertebrae ground and reformed. She burst into a clearing where moonlight pierced the canopy in silver shafts, illuminating a crumbling altar of vine-choked stone. Here, the air hummed with residual power, the ground etched with runes that glowed faintly, as if the earth itself remembered rites long faded. Elara collapsed against it, the cool granite seeping through her cloak, anchoring her against the storm within. Her hands, paws, flexed before her, fingers elongating into claws that scraped furrows in the moss. Tears stung her eyes, hot trails down her fur-dusted cheeks. As the pain crested in waves, ribs expanding with a crack like splitting wood, lungs filling with the sharp clarity of the wild. The enforcer emerged from the trees unhurried, his form silhouetted against the mist. But something shifted in his gaze. Not triumph, but a shadowed empathy, as if he too had tasted this forge of flesh and soul. "The moonless night hides nothing from us," he said, kneeling at a distance, his voice softening like distant thunder. "Drink deep of it, Elara Thornblood. The king awaits your howl." She roared then, a sound that shattered the night's fragile peace, echoing through the veil like a prophecy fulfilled. The shift consumed her, body twisting in ecstatic agony, fur rippling across her form in waves of obsidian and frost. Yet in the depths of that transformation, amid the fire and the fury, a spark ignited, not of submission, but of awakening. The beast was no curse. It was the key to the chains she had forged herself. As her vision sharpened to pierce the gloom, she met his eyes, her own now glowing with the ancient fire her mother had promised. The hunt was far from over. It had only just begun, and in its maw, She glimpsed the power to defy even a king. The forest held its breath, the stars above wheeling in silent witness as Elara rose on 4 legs, muscles coiling with newfound strength. The enforcer extended his hand once more, but this time she did not flee. Instead, she circled him, a low growl building in her throat, a challenge, a question, the first thread of an impossible bond woven in Moonlight's absence. Elara's paws sank into the mossy earth, each pad pulsing with the raw vitality of the shift, as if the forest itself fed her newfound form. The air thrummed with the aftershocks of her roar, leaves quivering overhead like the final notes of a dirge. Her fur, a sleek mantle of midnight threaded with silver frost, caught the scant starlight, transforming her into a spectre of the wilds. The enforcer remained kneeling, his golden eyes locked on hers, unyielding yet laced with a hunger that mirrored her own turbulent awakening. He did not rise, did not draw a blade or summon the pack's distant call. Instead he watched, breath steady, the runes on his cloak flickering like dying embers. The bond tugged at her, invisible threads weaving through the mist, pulling her closer despite the snarl curling her lips. It was no mere scent or sound that bound them. It was the echo of shared savagery, the ancient pulse that linked all who bore the wolf's mark. Elara circled him once more, her tail low and bristled, muscles rippling beneath her pelt with the urge to bolt or strike. The altar stone at her back hummed faintly, its runes awakening under her touch, sending sparks of cool energy up her spine. Visions flickered at the edges of her mind, wolves of old, silver-furred guardians of the veil between worlds, their howls weaving spells that bent the stars. Her mother's blood, she realized, was no curse but a legacy, stirring now in the depths of her transformed heart. He rose slowly, movements fluid as river water over stone, his cloak whispering against the undergrowth. "You feel it," he murmured, voice a low rumble that resonated in her bones, stirring the wolf's instinctive reply. "The pull of the pack, the fire of the throne. Thorn does not chain, he unleashes." His words carried the weight of truth, wrapped in deception, evoking the king's silhouette in her thoughts, a towering figure cloaked in shadows, his crown not of gold, but of woven thorns, eyes burning with the fervor of one who had clawed his way from exile to empire. Elara had glimpsed him once, in a fevered dream, after drinking the moonless tea, a wolf king whose roar shattered illusions, forcing the hidden to surface. She lunged forward, not in attack, but in test, her muzzle inches from his outstretched hand. His scent enveloped her fully now, earthy and commanding, laced with the faint bitterness of suppressed shifts, as if he too wrestled with the beast's relentless demand. Up close, scars marred his jawline, pale lines like frozen lightning, remnants of battles that had forged his loyalty. Elara's nostrils flared, inhaling the complexity of him. Loyalty forged in blood, a hidden fracture of doubt beneath the enforcer's iron facade. The wolf within her whined, a sound lost in the night's hush, yearning for connection amid the solitude that had defined her flight. But the shift's euphoria ebbed, pain resurfacing like thorns beneath the skin. Her body trembled, the partial change straining against her will, bones aching as if refusing to fully yield. She backed away, paws scraping the altar's edge, the stone's cool bite grounding her. Flashes of resistance surged. The village fires she had fled, the brother's grin fading into the pack's maw, the mother's final gasp promising power over submission. The enforcer stepped forward, his hand brushing her flank, gentle, almost reverent, igniting a spark that raced through her veins, both comfort and cage. "The king senses your fire," he said, fingers lingering on her fur, warm against the night's chill. "He forced my shift in the blood moon's cradle, broke me to rebuild. You could be his equal, not his shadow." Elara snapped at his hand, teeth grazing leather without breaking skin. a warning born of the wild's defiance. The forest responded, wind rising in a mournful keen through the oaks, carrying the distant clamour of approaching howls. The pack, drawn by her roar, their paws thundering like an encroaching storm. She whirled, ears pricking at the symphony of pursuit, the snap of twigs, the guttural calls that wove through the mist like hunting songs. Panic clawed at her throat, but beneath it, a fierce clarity bloomed, the wolf's instincts sharpening her senses, revealing paths through the underbrush that her human eyes had missed. Roots like hidden veins, shadows pooling into safe hollows, the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi marking an escape. The enforcer's expression shifted, a flicker of conflict crossing his features, golden eyes darkening with unspoken burdens. "They come for you," he warned, voice edged with urgency. "But I could lead you to him, to the heart of the realm, where the throne's power might temper your storm." His offer hung between them, a silken noose disguised as salvation. Elara's mind raced, the wolf's cunning weaving with her human resolve. Accept and risk the king's forge, flee and invite the pack's merciless chase. The bond deepened unbidden, a thread of empathy pulling at her solitude, whispering of alliances forged in the wild's unforgiving embrace. She bolted then, not away from him but alongside, her form a blur of silver and shadow through the trees. He matched her pace, shifting seamlessly into wolf form mid-stride, his body contorting with practiced grace, fur erupting in waves of coal black, eyes retaining their golden gleam. Together they wove through the labyrinth, the pack's howls closing in like a tightening snare. Branches lashed at Elara's sides, drawing beads of blood that scented the air, but pain fueled her now, each stride a defiance of the T's failed chains. The forest blurred into a tapestry of motion, dew-kissed ferns brushing her belly, the earth's rich loam yielding under paw, the enforcer's flank warm and steady beside her. As they crested a ridge, the vale below unfolded in moonless gloom, dotted with the faint lights of the border villages. Havens turned traps under the king's decree. Elara's heart ached with the weight of it all, the love she had left behind. Impossible now in the beast's grip, the destiny that demanded sacrifice, her humanity the price for power. The enforcer nipped at her heels, guiding her toward a hidden ravine where mist coiled like protective arms. In that descent, as the pack's cries faded to echoes, she felt the first stirrings of trust, a fragile bridge over the abyss of her isolation. Yet doubt lingered, a shadow in her glowing eyes. The Alpha's force was no gentle call, it was a tempest that reshaped souls. As they paused in the ravine's depths, water trickling like whispered secrets over stones, Elara turned to him, her growl softening to a questioning rumble. He met her gaze, shifting back to human form with a sigh that misted the air, scars stark in the dimness. "The road to Thorn is paved with choices, Mo," he said, hand hovering near her muzzle. "Yours could light it, or burn it all." The night deepened, stars veiled by gathering clouds, as Elara wrestled the wolf's urge to run free against the enigmatic pull of this stranger ally. In the silence, the bond solidified, a tentative weave of fate and fire, hinting at the sacrifices yet to come. The hunt pressed on, but now she was no longer alone in its jaws. The ravine's walls rose like the jagged teeth of some primordial beast, slick with moisture that dripped in rhythmic plinks, echoing the unsteady beat of Elara's heart. The air down here was thicker, laced with the mineral tang of underground streams and the faint rot of fallen leaves trapped in crevices. She stood on trembling paws, her breath fogging in the chill, the wolf's form still clinging to her like a second skin, fur matted with sweat and dew, muscles quivering from the exertion of the flight. The enforcer, back in his human guise, leaned against a moss-veiled boulder, his chest rising and falling in measured rhythm, golden eyes scanning the shadowed heights above as if the stars themselves might betray them. He broke the silence first, his voice a low murmur that blended with the trickle of water. "The pack will circle back at dawn. They scent your awakening like fresh blood on the wind." His fingers traced the edge of a scar on his jaw, the motion absent, almost tender, as if the mark were a lover's parting gift. Elara shifted uneasily, the wolf's instincts urging her to bare teeth or bolt, but the bond held her fast, a silken tether woven from shared essence, pulling at the hollow ache in her chest. She willed the change back, bones grinding in protest, fur receding in prickling waves that left her skin raw and exposed. The shift to human was agony reversed, a contraction that squeezed the wild from her veins, leaving her gasping on knees that bruised against the stone. Naked now, save for the tattered remnants of her cloak, she drew it tight around her shoulders, the fabric rough against the gooseflesh rising on her arms. Vulnerability clawed at her, sharper than any claw, but his gaze held no predation, only a shadowed understanding that mirrored her own fractured soul. "Why, help me?" she rasped, voice hoarse from the roar that still echoed in her throat. The words tasted of salt and earth, her tongue thick with the aftertaste of the beast. She pushed a strand of damp hair from her eyes, meeting his stare, searching for the lie beneath the enforcer's mask. He straightened, the leather of his cloak creaking like old bones, and stepped closer, the heat of him cutting through the damp cold. Up close, in the ravine's dim glow from phosphorescent fungi clinging to the walls, she saw the weariness etched into his features, lines around his eyes like cracks in marble, the faint tremor in his hand as he reached for a waterskin at his belt. "Because I was you once," he said, offering the skin without flourish. The water was cool and clean, washing away the metallic residue of her shift, but it did little to quench the fire of questions burning in her gut. Exiled from the border clans for resisting the call, Thorn found me in a storm like this one, broken and raging. He forced the shift, not with chains but with truth. The wolf isn't a curse, Elara. It's the key to everything we've lost. She took the skin, their fingers brushing in a spark of contact that sent a jolt through her, like lightning threading vein and bone. Memories stirred unbidden, her brother's laughter fading into howls, the village elders' warnings of the king's insatiable hunger for pure bloodlines like hers, the old magic, her mother's whispered legacy hummed in response, a faint vibration in the air around them, drawing faint glimmers from the ravine's runes, ancient carvings half buried in lichen, depicting wolves entwined with serpentine vines, symbols of bonds that could shatter or save. Elara's pulse quickened, the bond between them thickening, revealing flashes of his pain. A pack's betrayal, a mate lost to the king's wars, the enforcer's oath sworn in blood to atone for his weakness. But trust was a fragile thing, easily snapped like the twigs underfoot. "And if I refuse?" she challenged, handing back the skin, her voice steadying as the human resolve resurfaced. The ravine seemed to close in, the drip of water now a countdown, shadows lengthening as clouds overhead promised rain. "Will you drag me to him, like the others? Force the tea from my throat and watch me break?" His laugh was bitter, a sound like gravel shifting in the dark. "The tea only delays. Thorn doesn't force, he reveals. Your blood sings of the first she-wolf, the one who wove the packs from chaos. He needs that to mend the fractures, the endless wars with the shadow realms, the curses gnawing at our edges." He knelt then, level with her, his breath warm against her cheek, carrying the wild's untamed spice. The bond pulsed, unyielding, flooding her with echoes of his loyalty, his hidden fear that the king's vision might consume them all. For a heartbeat, tenderness flickered, his hand cupping her elbow, steadying the tremor she couldn't hide. A touch that spoke of impossible connections forged in solitude's forge. Thunder rumbled distant, vibrating through the stone, and with it came the first fat drops of rain, pattering on the ravine's lip like impatient fingers. Elara pulled away, the intimacy too raw, stirring longings she had buried with her humanity, a touch unmarred by fangs, a love that didn't demand surrender. Yet the wolf within whined, craving the pack's warmth, the enforcer's presence a balm against the isolation that had hollowed her. "Lead me, then," she said finally, rising with a resolve that masked her dread. "But if his throne is a cage, I'll tear it down, with or without you." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, scarred and fierce. They moved deeper into the ravine, his hand guiding her through twisting passages where the air grew warmer, laced with the sulphurous hint of hidden hot springs. The path narrowed, walls brushing their shoulders, forcing closeness that amplified the bond's hum. Visions shared now, her mother's fevered warnings mingling with his memories of the blood moon ritual where Thorn's roar had unbound his chains. Rain swelled above, a curtain sealing them from the pack's pursuit, but Elara felt the noose tightening. Each step toward the heartlands drew her closer to the Alpha's fire, where sacrifice awaited like a lover's blade. As they emerged into a cavern aglow, with steam rising from geothermal pools, the water surface rippling like liquid silver, Elara paused. The enforcer turned, his eyes reflecting the ethereal light. And for the first time, she saw the fracture in him, the man warring with the wolf, much like her own divided soul. "The road twists," he warned, voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, where stalactites wept droplets like tears. "Thorn's court lies beyond the Whispering Falls, guarded by illusions that prey on doubt. Face yours, or it will devour you." She stepped into the steam, the warmth enveloping her like an embrace, easing the ache in her bones. The bond thrummed, a promise of alliance amid the encroaching storm, but doubt lingered in her heart, a shadow whispering of betrayals yet to unfold. The Alpha's force was coming, inexorable as the rain, and in its wake she would either rise reborn or shatter into the wild's unforgiving night. The cavern's glow faded behind them as they pressed on, the path ascending toward destiny's jagged peak, where power and loss intertwined like roots in shadowed soil. Steam curled from the geothermal pools like the sighs of submerged spirits, wrapping Elara in a veil of humid warmth that clung to her skin, heavy and insistent. The cavern's walls, veined with quartz that caught the faint glow of bioluminescent algae, pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm, as if the earth itself breathed in time with her quickening pulse. Each step echoed softly on the slick stone floor, mingling with the distant rumble of the Whispering Falls above, where water cascaded in eternal descent, its roar a constant undercurrent promising both renewal and ruin. Elara's cloak, sodden from the ravine's rain, chafed against her shoulders, the fabric a sodden weight that mirrored the burden settling deeper in her chest. The enforcer, Kale, he had finally named himself in the steam's haze, led the way with unerring certainty, his silhouette cutting through the mist like a blade through fog. His presence was a double-edged comfort. The bond between them thrummed steadily now, a low vibration in her veins that shared glimpses of his resolve, his hidden scars laid bare in fleeting visions. Yet it chafed against her solitude, this unwelcome tether, stirring echoes of a life she had forsaken. Touches that lingered too long, gazes that held too much. She followed, her bare feet padding silently, the stone's chill seeping upward, grounding the wolf that still prowled at her edges, restless and watchful. As they ascended, the air grew charged, laced with the ozone tang of impending storm, and something older, more arcane, the residue of spells woven into the rock. Kyle paused at a narrowing fissure, his hand pressing against the wall, fingers tracing runes that ignited under his touch, blooming in soft azure light. "The falls guard the threshold," he said, voice low, threaded with caution. "Illusions born of the first pack's magic. They feed on your fears, twist them into chains." His golden eyes met hers, reflecting the rune-light like captured sunsets, and for a moment the bond flooded her with his memory. A younger Kale, forced to confront his own doubts under Thorn's unyielding gaze, emerging forged but fractured. Elara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, tasting the faint bitterness of the moonless tea that lingered like a ghost. The shift's afterglow hummed in her muscles, a reminder of the power she could no longer deny, yet fear coiled tight in her gut. Fear of the king, of the ritual that awaited, of losing the fragile self she had clung to through endless nights. "And if I face them alone," she whispered, the words hanging in the steam, vulnerable as exposed roots. Kyle's expression softened, a rare crack in his enforcer's armor, his scarred hand brushing hers in a fleeting anchor. "You won't. The bond binds us, for better or the wild's fury." But doubt flickered in his eyes, a shadow that mirrored her own, hinting at the sacrifices the king's court demanded, loyalties tested, souls remade in the image of the throne. They pressed through the fissure, the walls closing in, until shoulders scraped against unyielding stone, the air thickening to a suffocating press. Then, abruptly, the cavern opened into chaos, the whispering falls thundered into view, a curtain of silver water plummeting from unseen heights, crashing into a basin that frothed and foamed like a beast in rage. Mist rose in billowing clouds, veiling the far side where a stone archway loomed, carved with snarling wolves whose eyes seemed to follow their approach. The roar drowned all thought, vibrations shaking Elara's bones, stirring the wolf within to a frenzy of snarls and snaps. She stepped forward, the bond pulling her onward, but the illusions struck like invisible talons. The mist coalesced, swirling into shapes that clawed at her mind, her mother's fevered form, pale and accusing, mouth opening in silent screams of betrayal. Her brother's shadow, grinning with fangs too sharp, luring her into the pack's maw, where humanity dissolved like mist. Elara staggered, knees buckling into the shallow pool at the basin's edge, water icy against her skin, soaking through to numb the fire in her veins. "No!" she gasped, hands plunging into the froth, nails raking the gravel bottom as if to anchor reality. The visions pressed closer, whispers threading through the fall's roar. "Weak, unworthy, the king's chains will fit you best." Each word a barb that tore at her resolve. Kyle was at her side in an instant, his arm encircling her waist, pulling her against his solid frame. The bond surged, a counterforce that flooded her with his strength. Memories of his own trials, the illusions of lost love, manifesting as spectral claws, only to shatter under Thorn's forced revelation. "See them for what they are," he urged, his breath hot against her ear, voice cutting through the din like a howl in silence. "Echoes, not chains. Your blood defies them." His touch ignited the ancient magic within her, the old legacy stirring, a warmth blooming in her core, pushing back the shadows. Fur prickled along her arms, not in full shift, but in partial defiance. Claws extending to slash at the mist figures, dispersing them in wisps of vapor. The illusions recoiled, the fall's roar shifting to a mournful keen as the archway cleared, revealing a path winding upward into twilight-shrouded hills. Elara rose, drenched and trembling, water streaming from her hair in rivulets that traced paths like tears down her face. The wolf's eyes gleamed in her gaze, golden flecks amid the hazel, a mark of the power awakening. But victory tasted bittersweet. The visions had unearthed truth she couldn't bury, the love for her lost family, twisted into impossible longing, the destiny that demanded she sacrifice her solitude for the pack's greater fire. Kyle released her slowly, his hand lingering on her shoulder, the bond now a steady pulse, woven with mutual vulnerability. "The court lies beyond the ridge," he said, gesturing to the ascending path where torchlights flickered like distant eyes in the gathering dusk. "Thorn waits in the Heartstone Hall, where the blood moon's echo lingers. He will sense your approach, test your fire." Rain began anew, soft at first, pattering on leaves that overhung the trail, then swelling to a steady drum that masked their footsteps. They climbed in silence, the bond conveying unspoken fears, Kyle's dread of failing his oath, Elara's terror of the king's unmaking gaze. The hills unfolded in layers of shadow and heather, wildflowers crushed underfoot, releasing scents of earth and fleeting sweetness, a cruel reminder of tenderness amid the encroaching storm. As the path crested, the Alpha's realm came into view, a sprawling citadel of weathered spires rising from mist-wreathed valleys, banners of black and silver snapping in the wind, embroidered with the snarling wolf that symbolized unbreakable will. Elara's heart clenched, a vice of destiny and defiance, the moonless sky above pressed down, stars hidden as if the night itself held its breath. She felt Thorn's presence already, a distant rumble in her blood, calling the shift like a command etched in bone. Kyle stopped beside her, his profile stark against the stormlit horizon, and for a heartbeat their hands clasped, a silent vow amid the wild symphony. But the path downward beckoned, paved with the bones of the resistant, leading to the forge where kings were made and shadows reborn. The rain intensified, blurring the world into greys and silvers as they descended toward the inevitable. Elara's steps grew surer, the wolf's strength lending fire to her limbs, yet sorrow lingered in her wake, a trail of what might have been, sacrificed to the Alpha's inexorable pull. In the heart of the storm, she glimpsed her reflection in a puddle, eyes fierce with ancient light, face etched with the scars of awakening. The king awaited, and with him the final unraveling or the mending of her fractured soul. The storm broke fully as they crossed the threshold of the citadel's outer gates, rain lashing like whips forged from the sky's fury, soaking Elara to the bone and turning the flagstones slick beneath her feet. The air reeked of wet stone and smouldering torches, their flames hissing defiantly in iron sconces that lined the arched entrance. Towering walls of obsidian-veined granite loomed, etched with runes that glowed faintly red, pulsing like the heart of a colossal beast. Each step echoed through the courtyard, a hollow drumbeat that drowned the thunder, drawing shadowed figures from alcoves, guards with eyes like molten gold, their cloaks billowing in the gale, but none moved to intercept. The bond with Kyle thrummed urgently now, a lifeline amid the encroaching dread, his hand brushing hers in silent reassurance as they pressed toward the Heartstone Hall. Inside, the vast chamber swallowed them whole, its vaulted ceiling lost in gloom, where chandeliers of antler and crystal dangled like frozen lightning. The floor was a mosaic of polished black marble, inlaid with silver veins that traced the paths of ancient howls, leading to a dais at the far end. There, upon a throne carved from the Heartstone, a massive slab of crimson quartz that hummed with latent power, sat Thorn Blackwood, the Alpha King. He was no mere shadow from dreams. His form was immense, broad-shouldered and unyielding, clad in a mantle of midnight fur edged with frost-silver thread. His eyes, twin infernos of amber, fixed on Elara with an intensity that stripped her bare, seeing through flesh to the wild churning within. The air around him crackled, thick with the musk of dominance and earth-deep magic, stirring her wolf to a frenzy that clawed at her ribs. Kyle halted at the chamber's edge, his grip tightening on her arm before releasing, a gesture heavy with unspoken farewell. "He will test you," he whispered, voice barely audible over the rain's roar, seeping through unseen cracks. "Yield nothing until you're ready." But his golden eyes betrayed the fracture, the enforcer's oath warring with the bond's pull, a silent plea for her to survive the forge unscathed. Elara nodded, stepping forward alone, her sodden cloak trailing water in rivulets that snaked across the mosaic like tears from the stone itself. The guards melted into the shadows, leaving only the echo of her footsteps and the throne's relentless hum. Thorn rose as she approached, his movements deliberate, the throne's light casting elongated shadows that danced like spectres across the walls. Up close, scars crisscrossed his exposed arms, pale rivers mapping battles won, and losses etched into his soul. "Elara Thornblood," he intoned, voice a resonant growl that vibrated through her bones, calling the shift like a siren's song. "The moonless tea could not drown what sings in your veins. Come, face the fire you were born to wield. No chains, no blades, only his presence, a gravitational force that bent the air, drawing her inexorably closer." She halted at the dais' base, heart pounding a war drum, the wolf surging in response, fur prickling beneath her skin like embers igniting. Memories assaulted her, the village's warmth lost to exile, her mother's dying whisper of power unbound, Kyle's touch in the ravine. A fragile thread of impossible connection now fraying in the king's shadow. "You hunt the reluctant," she said, voice steady, despite the tremor in her limbs, tasting rain and resolve on her tongue. "But I am no prize to claim. The old blood doesn't bend, it breaks the cage." Defiance sparked in her eyes, golden flecks flaring, but Thorn's smile was a blade's edge, knowing, almost paternal, laced with the melancholy of one who had sacrificed kin to build his empire. He descended the dais in a fluid stride, circling her as the storm outside crescendoed, lightning flashing through high slits to illuminate the hall in stark bursts. "The packs fracture under curses from the shadow realms," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear, carrying the wild's untamed spice. "Wars that devour our young, illusions that twist loyalties, your legacy, the first she-wolf's weave, can mend it. But first, embrace the shift. Let me force nothing. Let it free you." His hand extended, palm up, runes on his skin glowing in sync with the heartstone, and the bond with Kale amplified, flooding her with echoes of the enforcer's past submission. Pain yielding to power, solitude shattered for the greater howl. The pull crested then, inexorable as the tide. Elara's knees buckled, a gasp tearing from her throat as the wolf erupted. No tea to numb, no illusions to hide. Bones cracked like thunder, limbs elongating in waves of agony and ecstasy, fur blooming in obsidian waves threaded with silver, her form twisting into the she-wolf's graceful ferocity. Pain lanced through her core, a forge's blaze that burned away the chains of resistance, but in its wake came clarity. The beast was no curse, but the vessel for her mother's promised magic. She rose on four paws, muscles coiling with primal strength, eyes locking onto Thorn's, equals now amber meeting ancient fire. He shifted seamlessly, his massive wolf form dwarfing hers, black pelt rippling like storm clouds, a low rumble vibrating the air. They circled the hall, a arena of shadows and light, the heartstone pulsing brighter, drawing their essences into its crimson glow. No battle of fangs, but of wills, his dominance pressing like a storm front, hers a counter-wind of defiance, weaving the old spells instinctively. Visions shared in the bond's web, fractured packs reuniting under her howl, curses unraveling like mist in dawn. Yet sacrifice loomed. Her solitude, the impossible tenderness with Kyle, humanity's fragile shell, all demanded on the throne's altar. Thorn lunged, not to conquer but to merge, their forms colliding in a tangle of fur and fury. The impact jarred her, but she met it, teeth grazing his flank in challenge, the magic surging between them, a weave of destinies mending the king's hidden fractures. Exhaustion claimed them as the shift peaked, bodies reverting in tandem, collapsing onto the mosaic in heaps of sweat-slicked limbs. Elara lay panting, a new scar tracing her collarbone like a silver vein, throbbing with the echo of power claimed. Thorn knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, not in victory, but alliance, eyes softened by the weight of shared burden. Kyle emerged from the shadows, drawn by the bond's culmination, his face a mask of relief and loss. The rain eased outside, giving way to a hesitant dawn that filtered through the slits, gilding the hall in pale gold. Elara rose, the scar a reminder of what was lost and gained. Isolation forged into strength, love's impossibility tempered into loyalty. "The Pax will heal," Thorn said, voice rough with the night's toll. "Under a queen's weave, not a king's alone." She met his gaze, then Kale's. The bond now a triad of fire and frost, hinting at redemptions yet to unfold. As the first light touched the heartstone, warming its crimson depths, Elara stepped into the dawn. The wild song in her blood no longer a curse, but a symphony of rebirth. The citadel stirred with waking howls, a chorus of hope amid the scars, and in that fragile peace, she glimpsed the purpose in every pain, the destiny that had always whispered her name.